Hey. Welcome. So this is the very, very first podcast, which I'm pretty excited about. And for our first guest, we have the wonderful, incredible woman, Margie Dyer, who's a prominent jazz musician in Melbourne, Australia. She's been around for a really long time. She's got some really cool, crazy stories. Had heaps of fun chatting with her. So if you're a musician, artist, or interested in music, or just a person that just loves other people or doesn't, I don't really care. But yeah, she was heaps of fun to chat to. So buckle up. This is a good one. It's fun. Technology. It'll start the microphone will start drooping shortly, I swear. This is shocking.
I reckon it'll be all right.
You reckon?
Yeah.
It's brand new. It's straight out of the box.
Should be fine.
Because I had broken one this morning, as I said, and I was like, I need an emergency mic stand. And he's like, I've got a good cheap one here for $40. I'm like, I'll take it.
Yep.
And it's exactly the same as the one that broke. So
Where do you go?
I just went to South Melbourne.
Factory Sound.
No, I went to the Acoustic Centre.
Oh, good.
Because that's where I get my strings from.
Ah.
Yeah, get my elixirs for my guitar, which I actually bought today, and we can talk about that as well. So actually, that's a good place to start is why I've decided why I wanted to ask you to do this, to chat. And music's always been a really, really big part of my life. And what I think is my makeup of a big part of who I am. So I figured you were a good person to start with because I know Hayley quite well, your daughter, and and I think you're an amazing musician. So, and people probably don't know enough about you.
I'm actually, as I play more and more, I actually like having a low profile. I'm really not into fame.
No.
Or money. And the only thing that matters is live performance for me now. Recording's fine, but everyone I know who produces an album, it has a moment in the sun and a lot of hype, and then it's gone. So you've got to treat, I think, your musical career as live performance and try and document what you're doing now and again through recording. But I hate recording. I hate it with a passion. But I always learn something, and something new will always come out in a recording which surprises me.
Yeah, sure.
Every time.
Because you've just done an album recently, haven't you?
The Old Diggers Picnic, which is a code word from my grandfather that meant to have, was code to stop my grandmother finding out he was having a couple of Abbott's lagers at 3:00 in the afternoon. So it was an old digger's picnic in the garage and in the garden.
Yeah.
And he was extremely funny person. So that was my childhood with him because he was a father substitute because my dad, as some people would know, was a musician, and he was killed after a gig. And that left me at the age of 2 without him. So that's where my musical love probably emanated, in trying to find him through his music. So he recorded and was very famous for his time, and he archived a 600 album collection of every major artist from New Orleans, mainly Louie Armstrong and Jelly Roll Morton, Bessie Smith, Mahalia Jackson, Muddy Waters, Champion Jack Dupre, all the great blues
The legends.
singers, all the legends. So that was my portal into his life, and it was sustaining, apart from the fact that I could hear him singing when his records were played, and actually until I was about 5 or 6, I thought he was inside the radiogram because it was this life force. It was very odd. And I thank him for the legacy because it just never stopped. It's never stopped from the age of 9 when I learnt my first blues and started classical training.
For sure.
It was the best. And also I would play along with his records and Jelly Roll Morton to learn. So I felt like I was in a band.
That's amazing. That's something I was going to do was get to that. I think you've got a droopy mic.
You're right.
These things
Did it.
It did it, didn't it? It went there. Oh, man. This is going to keep doing it, isn't it? Just whine, just crank it.
It actually reminds me of when I'm at the piano and it does that. Oh, it's a nightmare because I end up with my head down almost between my knees to follow it and keep singing because you can't stop.
No, you can't.
In the middle of a song. But I know the problem. Yep.
Oh, it doesn't. Yeah. That's just shocking now.
Yep.
And that must be. Is that? I think that's become almost like a. Is that? Do you think that's become part of like? Do you still have that problem now of the mic dropping?
Well, as you know, you keep replacing stands with the hope.
Oh, that's shocking.
That they'll be reliable.
I've barely got 1 hour out of that stand already. It's not even. It's been 2 minutes. It's dropping already.
Yep. They are the hard aspects of the minutiae of being a musician, all these bits and pieces, when all you want to do is just get your best sound and not fight the equipment.
I think that's a technology thing though, like in general. Like I have that same problem with phones or anything that, any sort of technology-based anything. They always say that technology is there to make it easier for us. And then constantly I'm constantly fighting the technology to make it bloody work, and it never works.
Yeah, I know. It's hard. Yeah. And so the same applies with your instruments, of course.
For sure, yeah.
And in the end, I think if I can be on a trustworthy, beautiful acoustic sound, which I can't, I need amplification for singing because I've got a lot to compete with if it's a 5-piece band. Yeah. But if it's just the piano and me in this room, it's perfect. There's nothing to get in my way. It's just me, my voice, and the instrument, and that's great. But that's pretty unusual.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. There's a few places that I played, I remember, and you would go to like almost like the French cafe sort of bars where they have the bar on top and then underneath they've got the dungeon kind of, and the music's played down there and the acoustics are so terrible. But I think it almost in a way adds to the atmosphere of the music because I think people generally understand that the sound is not going to be its best, but it's about being claustrophobic in a way and close to the sound of the music. And I've played myself in some places in Melbourne where the sound is just dreadful but you don't play those venues because because of the nostalgia or the who's played there before or because there's nowhere else to play because you're booked to play there.
Yep.
So
but you only ever well, for me anyway, I'm only as good as my last performance, and we have fragile senses of our worth. And if the sound is really bad, then I just think, wow, it's time I stopped because I can't do what I want. Sometimes you get through it, but sometimes it's quite destructive.
So have you done that? Have you actually stopped a gig before?
I don't think so.
You've just stormed off stage?
No.
I can't work under these conditions.
No, but we did have a gig at the new venue at the Classic Cinema, which has a jazz room.
Sure.
And it's a really lovely room. And it was a beautiful gig. And there was a false fire alarm.
Great.
And it was full on. It was that sound that they give you on the radio. Stop everything you're doing, look for the nearest exit, and leave now. So the audience started to go. And we were playing Strutting with Some Barbecue with Matt Jodrell, who's a beautiful trumpeter. He was filling in for Eugene, who's equally beautiful, but Matt was filling. And we were doing Strutting with Some Barbecue, and there's a key change that was coming up, and we were not prepared to stop. And frankly, I understood the musos on the Titanic. We just said, no, we're just going to keep going, fire alarm or not.
We're going to go down with a sinking ship.
Yeah. And we didn't leave till a fireman turned up in full regalia with masks and everything and said, you need to go. We said, okay. We just finished the song. That was so good. That's the only time I've ever walked out.
And was the place... Had all of the patrons that
all of them.
left
the theatre was empty too. There are 1,000 people on the street. We're all out there.
So it was a decent sized theatre too, isn't it?
Well, that's sort of adjacent to this little room.
Right. Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
So it was hilarious. So the band said, "Oh, well, we'll go out and have a drink on the street." And we actually got more people to come in because some of the patrons had come out and said, "Oh, we'll come into the jazz room now."
Nice.
So it was good.
Speaking of so going back a little bit, I suppose, to your childhood and when you were younger and your influences and then how you started out playing blues. So jazz wasn't something that you went to immediately, or was it always blues? Or
it was both.
Yeah, because
I fell asleep often to the strains of Bessie Smith or Big Bill Broonzy or Jelly. So it was a huge collection of all of those people. And we also had a lot of house parties, as in like rent parties. So it was always a live music, huge party. So I didn't know anything but people coming to the house and playing their instruments. So I met all the most wonderful musicians. Some of them my father's colleagues, some of the newer generations coming up. And therefore I met people who said, well, I'll tell you what to do. Some of them were negative, which annoyed me because I was Warwick's daughter and he had a huge reputation, and they sort of said, well, yeah, okay. But there are others who said, I'm going to teach you. Roger Janes was a trombone player, and he had a girlfriend called Jenny who played great boogie-woogie piano, and she had 4 fingers cut off at the knuckles, but she still could play brilliantly. And it was the 60s, and she wore black tights and she had short crew-cut blonde hair, and Roger dressed like something out of Charles Dickens with a watch chain and played the trombones. And because my dad was a trombonist, my mother loved him. And he taught me Apex Blues in B-flat. And I thought this was the most fantastic thing in my life. And I had an old reconditioned piano, and the only thing I wanted to do was wag school and go home and play, which I used to do. I loved it, and the house was empty because my mother worked, and so I'd have the house to myself. And
jamming away.
I could just jam, and I got caught so often.
And so were you singing at the same time?
No.
So when did you start? Because you've got quite the unique...
I didn't think of it. I did not think of it. So the first band I joined was the Melbourne University Jazz Band when I went there first year, and I auditioned with a washboard because I thought, I'm not going to do the piano. I mean, I can play a couple of blues, but really I don't think so.
Sure.
So I went with a washboard, and they said, we don't need a washboard. Jeanette, who's a mechanical engineer third year, she's our washboard player, and they were looking for piano. So some hotshot third year engineering guy was playing Fat Swallow like there was no tomorrow, and I was sitting there thinking, oh, gee, I have no hope here. And so he finished with a flourish, and Cam, who was the leader of the MUJB, said, well, just play anything you like. So I played Apex Blues, and they said, do you want to join the band?
Right on.
And that was that. And they said, now, first gig is next week. And they said, look, come and have a listen to some of the material we're going to do. So we walked over to Story Street in Parkville, and there were lots of records played, and he said, you know, we've been listening to this band. Do you know the Red Onions? And, of course, Alan was in that. And I'd been watching Alan since I was a kid because there were about 11 years between us. And so my mother used to take me to the Red Onions, and I'd sit on the floor.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
And watch Alan play when, you know, they were the up-and-coming trad band. And I said, of course I know the Red Onions. And then he said, you know, they do a lot of Frank Johnson's material too. And Cam said, do you know Frank Johnson? I said, yes, that was my dad's band. Oh, who was that? Oh, Warwick Dyer. He said, no way. So it was so fantastic. But he said, we're going to do Wolverine Blues. I remember this well, and I've only just started playing it again in the last year. And I saw all these chord symbols. I knew some, but I didn't know what a diminished was, and I was absolutely terrified. So I rang a friend of my dad's who used to play piano in the Frank Johnson band, Frank, and I said, Frank, I need a really quick lesson. I don't know what these symbols are, and I've got a gig in 4 days. And he said, oh, you'll be fine. Come over. He said, it's based on the scales. You know your scales? I said, yeah. Do you know your arpeggio? Yeah. Okay, this is a diminished. So I did this really fast learning thing, and I was dropped straight into it and did my first piano gig. So I wasn't singing at all. I was just doing this piano thing, and I loved it. I loved it and got heaps of gigs in the InterVarsity stuff, and
sure, yeah,
really great fun.
And so what year was this?
That was about 73.
Right, okay.
And I almost failed because I was having such a good time in the band, and sort of, you know, the usual romance, which one, clarinet or trumpet? They were both asking me to go out, and I was sort of thinking, I'll answer the phone. I ended up going with the trumpeter, and that was sort of a romance that was turbulent and great and then terrible. I nearly failed, you know, when that broke up. And Julian was a classically trained trumpeter and very pedantic. And his mother was a concert pianist, and she was very pedantic, and they were sort of looking at me being not a sight reader. I'd trained, but I wasn't that sort of thinker.
Yeah, sure.
No, I wasn't. I was terrified of sight reading. And my music teacher was too gentle. He didn't push me.
Yeah, okay.
So anyway, so that was how I started, and I've not been out of a band since. That would lead to another one and another one and another one. It went on and on. And then in one band called the Crazy Cats, which worked an awful lot in the 70s, I decided to sing a couple of Dad's songs that I knew back to front from listening, which was Ace in the Hole and Big Bill Brunsey's Sugar Blues. And I still sing Sugar Blues. And that would be my two songs in the band that would feature, and Meilenberg Joys. And I just thought, oh, yeah, that's okay, but I'm really not a singer. Never considered, still don't really. And then years after doing that, I had some classical singing training with a wonderful person, Kathleen Goodall, and that really taught me a lot about breathing. But I'm actually a mezzo-soprano, and I don't like the sound. And I don't... It's weird.
Really?
It's beautiful when you're doing that style.
Sure.
But I wouldn't use it in this context, singing
No, okay. With
blues.
Yeah. Like, for example, what you're playing at the moment at Clay Pots, you wouldn't...
No, because it's a much higher register.
Sure.
And I don't like my tone in the upper registers at all. And in fact, all the people I listened to was people like Big Bill Brunsey, who had a deep, resonant voice, and I loved that, and so did my dad, and so did Bessie Smith, and so did Mahalia Jackson. That was like my favourite register. You know,
and do you think that's where your voice... So did you
sits.
Did you try to carbon copy?
No.
Anyone?
What I did learn by listening, by absorption, is phrasing.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is really difficult if you haven't absorbed it. It's particularly West African, and it's beautiful. And those who don't really understand that phrasing don't know what you're on about.
Yeah. What? When you talk about phrasing with the what do you mean?
Well, it's a bit like if you're reading Shakespeare or you're reading a script. The rhythm, and also how long you pause before you go to a next phrase, and whether you make it a long phrase, a short phrase, come in a bit later to the sentence, if you like.
Sure.
A lot of people always sing on the first beat. That's more rock and roll, sort of 1 and 3, but African's sort of 2 and 4. And so if you're singing a song, quite often you will not start on the first beat of the bar. In fact, the longer you can wait, the better. And then it compresses itself, and it's ahead. This is the whole wonderful thing about a jazz rhythm section. It's metronomic, but there's like a line over the top that's moving across it, and the rhythm section must not go with the other person. They might wait before they start, but you keep moving forward. So it's a little game of chase.
Sure.
The phrasing, and it's beautiful if it works, you know. And, you never sing on one. I mean, sometimes you do in some blues, but pretty much I don't think one. I think at least 2 or 3.
Yeah, give it a minute. Give it a breath.
There's a little space before you start, and it's beautiful. And it's something I'm still trying to perfect. Not overcrowding, leaving space.
I think that's why I think like one of my I've got a number of musicians that I just loved, and I look up to a lot. One of them was Robert Johnson. I think he does that superbly. Yep. Like, he was a brilliant guitarist, but I think his vocals were equally brilliant because they were so raw, and in a way they were kind of understated and so imperfect. And especially I think the thing that I loved about it most is the recording styles that they had back in the 20s and the 30s, and that it was like, and go, do you know, like, because it's on tape and you've got just the one, you got it. We can't edit and cut like I can now on this computer. It's incredible what I can do now.
Yep.
And back then it was like you got to nail it, and
you do.
And for someone like Robert Johnson it was so, when you listen to it and you put on headphones and you listen to a good recording, you're listening to that artist is playing to you, versus nowadays you listen to some music and it's like you're hearing all the production, you're hearing the band, you're hearing everything, and there's some sort of dissociation or a disconnection that I have with some music now, like versus the 20s, 30s, all the way through to the 70s. And I think sometimes in the 80s there was some really amazing, like David Bowie did beautiful recordings, but the Yardbirds, early Clapton, even Elvis, his early recordings, they were so personal. I felt more connected as a person listening to that music. And maybe that's why, I don't know, spitballing, that's why some music has stood the test a little bit longer than other music, like why some albums are still around 80 years later or 40 years later.
Because it's honest.
Sure, yeah.
And I think with any sort of performance, people pick up on honesty. And they are honest, and always the first take, in my experience, is the best.
Yeah.
Every time. It's astonishing because, as you would know, and people who record, if you do 2 or 3 takes, you can't believe how the tempo changes, or there'll be something in the first one that's fresh that you can't get back. You'll find better bits of it in the other takes, but it won't have that substantial wholeness and spirit. It's amazing. So I don't know what that is. It must be very subconscious.
Almost like that nervous energy. It's like when people get too comfortable, it's just almost becomes subconscious, or muscle memory starts to kick in. And I don't know. I completely agree with you. Like, there's a number of times I've been in a recording studio and the first one, while it's been imperfect, there's more of an energy about it, and you just a bit more of a buzz about it. And So that's why I never liked click tracks.
Oh,
It's just like,
tell
oh
me.
man, I feel like a machine.
No, I think that's so wrong. And that's the other thing I've noticed about musicians who play well together. There's almost a physical synchronicity as well. We're all sort of physically moving
Sure.
with the instrument and reading each other's physicality to some extent, even though it's sound. But I think that starts to happen as well.
It's a language though, isn't it?
It's a really wonderful cohesion.
Yeah.
And that's why I love clay pots, because we play every week, and that is very important to a band.
How long have you been playing at clay pots for?
About 9 or 10 years.
Every week.
Every week.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. Plus a solo I used to do as well. So that is a real plus, and I wouldn't care if, it was the smallest place on earth. It's just playing every week. It's intrinsically important.
Do you feel like you're still getting better as a musician?
No. And the more I do, the more I think I'm so bored with myself. And I wonder about what I'm going to learn next with singing. But I hear my colleagues, everyone repeats themselves. You can't not, because you fall into comfort zones, and then you know a phrase and you'll use it to great use, and
Sure.
It will always have fire. But because I do a couple of solo gigs a week, that really bores me of myself, and I find it terrifying. I actually am so nervous the whole time. I can't wait to stop, take a break. It's weird. Excuse me. And I've been singing hard this week. That's why I'm losing my voice.
Oh, my voice is shattered at the moment.
Mind you, it's other things. But yes, I don't know what I want to learn. And there are a lot of things I need to learn, and I don't know whether I'm going to get it right. I've been practicing as I used to when I was classically learning,
Sure.
how to break up a piece into compartments and learn them one by one until the fingering's right, until it's muscle memory, which is a Jelly Roll Morton piece. And it's not that hard, but because I generally hang to chords rather than melody lines, the right hand doesn't do a lot. This involves a fair bit. And so I've gone back to learning it, and then I give up and think, oh, what a waste of time. But yesterday, after a couple of months going to and fro with it, I nailed a couple of phrases and bars.
Good.
They fell naturally without my thinking. So I guess I can learn and not give up too quickly, but I am impatient. And I've got lots of conceptual projects in my head.
What have you got?
I want to do the planets. I want everyone in the band to take a planet and write their own version of the planet and integrate it into the New Orleans Quintet. And it can be instrumental.
Do you include Pluto?
Yeah, because Hayley was telling me that NASA has recorded the sounds of the planets, and they all have their own sound, their
Really?
own key. So whatever they are, that's what people will have to do. I don't know where this site is. Also, I'd like to draw on some of the Greek mythology of the planets.
Sure.
As ideas for either words for song or instrumental, and see what happens. But I mean, it's a lot of work. I know it's probably a couple of years by the time we all get it together.
Sure.
But that would be fun and beautiful, because I love the idea of universal.
Do you find are you a big fan of planets and stars and
Love it.
you look up a lot?
Love it. And I think you stop worrying about everything on the earth when you go to the stars. It just sort of takes you and you think, wow, why worry?
Well, it does. It always reminds me, like, I've always had a fascination with the galaxies and universe and stars. And I mean, growing up in New Zealand, I think we're very fortunate with the night sky that we have there. It's it's incredible to be able to look up and actually see the shape of the Milky Way. You sort of, whether or not you can or you can't, but sort of seeing where you are, where the planet is, or where our solar system is, on where we are positioned on the Milky Way. It feels, it's very humbling, because you go, oh, goodness, I'm so small and not so insignificant, I guess, but just small and almost, it's almost pointless, because and as you get older, you learn about light and how long it takes for things to travel. And you're like,
I love it.
You think, when I was 8 years old or 4 years old, looking up and looking at those suns, it's taken them 10,000 years, a million years for that light to travel, for that moment in time to travel to where you are at the moment, looking up at it. It's like, is it even still there now? And by the time, if we were to get there, I love the night sky. I think it's incredible.
Oh yeah, and it's everything that we try and understand, infinity, and it's great because you can't. And I think it's nice to have mystery and a sense of, being so insignificant that you just don't worry about it. And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. So I love all that. So I'd like to somehow take that gargantuan concept and confine it to a New Orleans quintet.
I think that's a good idea. I think that'd be quite fun. I also wanted to talk to you about, I have this strong belief, I guess, or this kind of this thing about music being a language and the international language that everyone speaks. It doesn't matter where you come from or what language you spoke, or if you don't speak, or even people that are deaf, and being able to hear and feel music and translate that and using that for emotion and mood. And I just love that idea that music brings people together, and I think it also isolates people and creates things to talk about. And I love the fact that, for me, I always think of music as like the global language that we could all speak.
Totally. And apropos of that, there was Montserrat used to be a venue for jazz festivals.
Sure.
Montserrat in Eltham. It's a beautiful place, and it no longer is, sadly. But I remember playing there, and there was a band from Japan performing, and they did not speak English at all. And they were brought out by Toyota. They were sponsored by Toyota.
It's
and
amazing.
They had their Toyota suits and everything. And we're all gathered out the back, and they were smoking away, as Japanese do, and taking a break. And they couldn't speak English, but we'd just say, Louie Armstrong, yes, or Potato Head Blues, or one of Jelly's songs, and then they'd go and play it, and there was this instant understanding. It was wonderful. And I just thought, wow, that breaks it down. You don't need to speak a language at all. I might have to stop for a second.
No, please. I
It's come back.
I was feeling that actually before we actually set up, and then you gave me that wonderful cup of tea, and I feel a little bit cleared, a little bit better in the throat. I was a little bit worried driving up here. I was like, oh my god, and be coughing and spluttering. But
you can edit my coughs out, can't you?
No, it was just going to go boom.
That's all right. Well,
we're not going to do any edits.
It's verite.
Put it straight up there.
Well, I have to tell you a really good story if we have time, because I was mentioning this to Hayley, that there's a picture up there which you can't see, but it's a press photo of my father meeting Louie Armstrong.
Sure.
And the Louie band came to Melbourne about 3 times in 1950, before I was born, and then after Dad was killed, so that was after 55, they came back, and then they came again early 60s. So I always had this understanding that Louie Armstrong was considered a god by my father, and I had a picture of him almost on his knees playing to Louie with a huge smile. It's the loveliest photo. So I was 9 whenever this was, might have been mid-60s, I don't know. And my mother said, the Louie band is here, and when they go to the airport, we'll go and see them, as we've done for years. Because my parents also hosted parties for Louie's band when they were in Melbourne, in Inkerman Street, St Kilda. That's why I love St Kilda. It's really part of the whole deal. Anyway, so we went to Essendon Airport because Tullamarine wasn't built, and Louie was leaving. And my mother said, with some friends there, there's Louie Armstrong sitting over there, and he was having a coffee and a donut, and he had his wife Lucille with him, and the plane was getting ready, warming up, and they said, go and ask him if he would mind signing in your autograph book. So I walked up to this beautiful man sitting there, and I still see the black patent leather shoes shining and white socks and beautifully dressed, and this marvellous woman with afro red hair. And I said, excuse me, Mr. Armstrong, would you mind signing my book? You know, I had plaits, and he said, sure. And I thought he was really going to sing strongly. He was so quiet and so shy, and I've got the autograph up there and it's a treasure. And then his wife Lucille, who was a gorgeous woman, I think his third wife, she said, I'll sign it too, honey. So she wrote in, and it says from Lucille Armstrong too. And it's a very strong and wonderful memory. It's a great thing to have met this man, albeit under those circumstances, but never leaves me. It's such a strong impression, you know.
Do you use it as a kind of a totem in some moments when you're like, oh, that's right, this is where I come from and this is where I am today?
Yes, and how lucky was I to meet this man?
Fortunate.
You know? Lucky. I mean, it's a very fleeting part of your life, but very powerful. So I do treasure that and think, wow, that's an unusual life. And I doubt there are many kids in Melbourne who would have known who Louie was and met him. So that's pretty special, I reckon.
When I was in the small town that I grew up in New Zealand, it's called Woodbury. I went to a small primary school. There was, I think, 20 people all up, including the kids and the teachers. There was two teachers. And we had a part-time science teacher as well, who wasn't really much of a science teacher. But there was a semi-famous musician who lived in the village in Woodbury. His name's Jordan Luck, and he played in a band in the 80s, a New Zealand band called the Exponents, and they got quite big around the world. I'm not sure if you have heard of them.
I've heard, yeah.
Yeah, so Jordan Luck, and this is going into the early 90s, and as a kid growing up, while music was, I was big sports as well, and I was right into basketball, and for some reason I was into collecting basketball cards, and the little cards I used to buy in the pack at the shop. And one day Jordan Luck came to our school to speak, as he did sometimes often, because he literally lived around the corner. And I suppose if he wasn't drunk, he'd turn up and talk to us. And this one day I went up to him and I asked him, can I get your autograph, please? And I handed him a Michael Jordan basketball card. I said, can you please sign this, because your name's Jordan Luck and it's Michael Jordan. So I made the correlation that they were the same person. It's not even close. And that's about I think that's the only person I've ever had, another thing about in my life, had signed something that's as close to a celebrity signing anything of mine. I should actually ask him about that if he remembers it. I doubt that he would. Sometimes I push that memory back myself. I'm like, I can't believe I actually did that as a 6-year-old child.
Yeah, but you do that when you're that age. You don't have any fear. You don't have any sense of... I had awe, but I wasn't afraid. No. I just thought, I don't really know what to say, except, you know, clearly I was so polite and so respectful because he was such an important man.
Do you think that... I think celebrities and how we view our idols as kids growing up. Do you think that's changed? Do you think people like look at them differently now to what they did say?
Yeah, probably.
And
yes, because they were more untouchable then. Somehow they were harder to meet. I don't know. Some of them were out there signing things, I guess, especially in the cricket world and stuff. But in the music world, they seem to, maybe because Australia's so far away, it was lucky that Louie came here. Otherwise, I would never have met him.
No.
But possibly there is, because of travel now, it's easier to see the people you really care about.
Plus the internet. And
the internet. But that sort of dilutes the mystery a bit. I think there's a place for great artists. It's a little bit removed from you. They have a place. I wouldn't want to see them every day because it might spoil it, you know.
I think about that with people like Jim Carrey, for example, the actor, comedian. And for me, like I've met a number of people, celebrities, actors and artists, musicians, and I never really get starstruck or anything like that.
No.
But I have this thing with Jim Carrey that I have a fear of, not a fear, but I don't want to meet this man because I have this idea of who he is in my head, and not that it'll ruin it, but especially now as he's gotten older, his art he's an incredible artist. He does the most amazing paintings, and I feel like I want to keep that disconnection. I want that as you
nice.
said, that mystery, the enigma of who that person is, and I've always got these visual representations of his artwork and who he is as a person. I feel like to know that or to have met that person,
Yeah, because their art is its separate self, and when we hear terrible things about people, that then you start. Oh, you can never stop loving the art, but it confuses you because it's a split personality.
Because a lot of art, I suppose, is a snapshot of that person in that moment.
Yep, and I think their art has to be separate from their personal life. I really do. I said to Hayley the other day, O.J. Simpson was so funny in wasn't Flying High, I don't know which one, with Leslie Nielsen, terribly funny, and yet the man is possibly, has sort of stuff hanging over him with all the court case that suggests that's not the person, and yet he was so hilarious in film. So I don't know what I'm saying here.
But I know I often forget that O.J. Simpson's an actor sometimes. I mean, I think as I was growing up as a kid, I didn't really know him as an actor. I probably more knew him as like the person on TV. There's like, why is this orange juice person? Why is O.J. Simpson like? Why is it, apart from it? Why is it such a big deal? And I guess it was because it was such a huge celebrity.
I mean, he's not as big as like some of the great writers and who were shocking in their personal life, and I don't really need to know that because I just want to read. If it's Tolstoy, I don't need to know he treated his wife badly at times. I don't know. I mean, that does confuse me. So I like to keep them in their separate spot as beautiful artists.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you did meet them and live with them, you probably wouldn't like them. You might.
They might leave the dishes out or drink your milk.
Yeah, that's true.
You just don't know what kind of people they're going to be like.
No.
How come you never flush the toilet?
Yeah, all of that stuff.
Stop using my toothbrush.
They're removed from all that mundane thing.
Yeah.
And it's good. It's good.
It's a good thing. How do you feel something else I wanted to ask you is because you've been around. You've lived in Melbourne your whole life, right?
Yep.
Right. So, and you've performed all through Australia, but in Melbourne.
Mainly Melbourne, yeah.
How do you feel like the live music or just live music scene is going in Melbourne? Because it's gone through quite a decent sort of transition in the last 10 years that I've seen in the lockout laws. A lot of the venues that I, played in and loved going to, watching incredible artists closing down or getting really close to closing down, DJs coming through.
There's a bit of that in St Kilda, in that because of apartment construction, people moving in don't want to be disturbed, although the government did change that, fortunately, that once there's a live music district established, they can't stop it. But prior to that, we nearly lost lots of important venues because of gentrification of the lovely suburbs with the old pubs. But Melbourne has one of the biggest live music scenes in the Southern Hemisphere. It really is equal to most places in the world. And Melbourne's always had that reputation of being deeper artistically than, say, Sydney. Sydney will love me saying that, but I mean Sydney's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a wonderful
but
city.
Sydney was always more glitzy and a little less. Melbourne was a bit snobby because we were the intellectual capital city. It always was. It was the cultural hub, and the music reflected that.
Sure.
So live music, they say, here is huge. It's bigger than Sydney. A lot of Sydney musicians are trying to move here and work. A lot come from Perth.
Perth has a wonderful music. They have beautiful, incredible bands, musicians come out of.
Absolutely.
What is with Perth? It's so
Perth.
far out in the middle of nowhere,
Yep.
and there's something in the water.
Oh, definitely. Some of my favourite musicians within the jazz world have been trained in Perth, and they're wonderful. So it must be the con there and the jazz course, I think, in WA that's just producing wonderful, wonderful musicians. But I don't think there's a lot of live music for them in Perth either.
Well, it's quite a small town, isn't it?
Yeah, and then a lot of musicians resort to teaching because they have to earn a living.
That happens with actors as well.
Yep. And there's always something lost if teaching is greater than performance.
Sure.
Because there's no better test in the world than live performance. There's no tricks. You just have to do it. And teaching can be a little bit removed. So I understand, but I've seen a very good musician stay in teaching and then performance sort of dissipates.
And you've really got to keep with your performance. That is another instrument itself in a way.
It is.
You've really got to keep it tuned. Otherwise, you do lose it, and you feel.
Absolutely.
And you go back. I haven't played a gig in, I don't want to say 7 years, 6 years, 7 years, and so I have a thing where I'm afraid of going back almost to playing because it's been so long, and there's this almost too much rust built up now, where the rust has become its own exterior shell, and it's going to be quite difficult to break. Maybe.
No, you'd be back in within a month.
give it a gig.
Within a month, it's just playing.
You just got to. That's right. You've just got to keep.
And there's no substitute. I mean, we all say one live performance is worth 15 rehearsals.
Oh,
because you can stop and start and muck about. And although I find rehearsal terrifying because it's my colleagues and I don't want to muck up with them, but live performance is the way.
I love it. I loved it, and I always loved it more than recording. And I did love recording because you got to try things out, and you got to mess around a little bit and play with the music and sort of find what you could do with it. And it was nice to listen back to things and go, actually, that was really good, or that was rubbish. But music, playing it live, it's you're telling a story, you're talking to someone in the audience, even if there's one person or there's 1,000 people, they are different audiences to play to, but you're still communicating and talking to them.
Yeah, it's great.
It's
great. It's like, we were saying music's a universal language, just like people sharing their different food styles and stuff. It's a leveler, it's a human thing. It's got nothing to do with nationality or gender or anything. It's just totally universal, and I love that about music. And I'm fortunate that the people I've always worked with are intelligent, They've largely been men, but intelligent. And I've never, except a couple of older musicians that were a bit misogynistic, but it's always been a wonderful egalitarian ensemble, and that's a great thing.
I always feel like with music as well, like people aren't competing with each other as much and not trying to be better than someone else. They're just trying to, I'm not quite sure what the word is, but build each other up. It's like a challenge, you know what I mean? And I love playing with other musicians for that reason. Is, you know, you test, you know, you feel the water out, you know, where are you at? Can you feel, you know, and then it's not so much you don't down someone, you just, you know, you try to build them up, and I love that challenge aspect. And I feel the same way about being an actor and doing a scene with someone else.
Yeah, of course you would.
You know, I always feel like that's a bit of a tug and a push and a pull sort of challenge kind of, you know, can
definitely.
you go, can you not?
Yep.
It's really fun.
Yep.
Do you have any special instruments in your life apart from your beautiful piano? Do you have any? Do you have any? Is there anything you've like hung on to, or is there any? Like this guitar I bought, this beautiful guitar that I bought with me. Has a little bit of a story to it. I went into a music shop here in Melbourne, and I think it was a Manny's, I can't remember. And I've always wanted a Taylor ever since I saw a Taylor when I was in Christchurch, and there was this weird carbon fibre guitar. I was like, what is that? So I pick up this carbon fibre acoustic guitar and I'm playing it, and it's a Taylor. And I'm like, this is the weirdest sounding, beautiful, bright, but it's just the weirdest, oddest guitar. Really nice to play. And ever since then, I've always wanted a Taylor. And so I always go into shops looking, and they're always quite expensive, $4, $5, $8, $10,000 for guitar.
Whoa.
Yeah. And this day I went into this Manny shop, and playing the selection of guitars that you can as a guitarist, you can just pick up a guitar and just play it. And I played this one guitar I picked up, and I was like, just started playing it, it just felt, you know, it was like putting on an old pair of shoes, you know, or this T-shirt you've had for so long, it's got holes in it, but you just don't want to throw it out because it's so comfy. And I remember playing this, it was like, this is really effortless to play for me. This is just, you know, what am I doing with all my silly other little guitars and instruments that I've got? And, you know, it's like $6,000. I can't afford this bloody guitar. And that's the other rubbish thing about being a musician. You paid $25 and all your instruments are expensive. So I put this guitar back. 4 years later, I go looking for a guitar. 3 years later, I go looking for a guitar. Back to the same guitar shop, pick up this guitar and play it. I'm like, oh, this feels really good. Go up to the counter and like, oh, maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll just put it on hire purchase or something like that. You know what I mean? He scans it in at like 80% cheaper than what it was in the price tag. Whoa. And he's like, this shouldn't be right, but it's been here for so long. It's like, how long has this thing been here? It's like, oh, about 2.5, 3 years. And it was the exact same guitar that I'd played all that time. He's like, and that's the closest thing I get to fate, because I'm not a big believer in fate, but you know,
jeez,
maybe it sort of hit itself behind another guitar or something like that. I don't know if someone else didn't pick it up and want it. It was such a...
You were meant to have it.
Yeah, because I really don't believe in fate, but it's the one thing that I've had in my life where I've been like, maybe that's the one fleeting moment where I'm like, okay, fate exists. But for me, it, you know...
There is a fatalistic understanding about the fact that it was still there, and that someone else didn't take it. That's
it's unusual, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a long time.
So events could have changed things, but they didn't. But then again, you were determined to keep looking for it. So that's your...
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
Determination coming into it and finding it.
Because every other instrument that I played, I always compared it to it.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? I'd be like, oh, it's just like... And I'd play other Taylor guitars and I'm like, oh, it's amazing. It sounds great and it feels good. But you just like have this memory of this thing that you played and you're like, it's not quite the same as what it was. And then you start questioning yourself, is the memory that I'm having false? Am I making this up? Is this...
But an instrument that you love is just your best friend. The piano's my friend. I've gone to it so often in my life with no one around, and it just talks back to you, and it's just wonderful. And of course, you playing guitar, it's a tactile thing too. You have to use your senses to play the instrument apart from your mind, and it's such a friend. It's such a friend, and if it's a beautiful friend, you can go to it. It's always there. So other things are inconsistent, but not your instrument.
So do you have how long have you had this one for? This
that's about 30 years old, and it came from some money from my father's estate, and we got it wholesale, and we were living in the bush. And I can't explain to you what it's like when you're on top of a hill and it's a windy gravel road and you see this piano truck at the bottom of the hill on its way up to the house, wobbling up, finally. Then they unpack the truck and there's a whole grand piano in pieces, in boxes. I mean, that whole thing comes apart, as you would understand. The legs come off, the keyboard comes off, the lid comes... It was all in bits. And they brought it in and they put it up. And there's this instrument. I can't tell you the first time, and it was in a really bright room. It was...
so it stood out because it's a beautiful black. It's a deep black.
Well, this was in Red Hill in a sort of crazy solar wind-powered house. And so we had slate floors for absorbing heat at the right time of year.
Yeah.
And we had a solarium, which was a glass box at the front of the house facing north, which was also a way of getting heat in the winter. But then it had baffles and stuff in the summer. So the piano was in a room off this solarium on a slate floor with just glass and timber, and it was like it had 10 decibels per string. It was so loud. I thought, wow, I love this. I mean, you know, some people would like it softer, but I thought, no, this is fantastic. It's like it's mic'd up and I can really have fun with this. And no one had played it except me, and the action of that piano was beautiful because they take a long time to wear in, but it from the beginning had a beautiful action.
Straight out of the box.
Straight out of the box. So that was 30 years. And it's recently been restored by my piano tuner, who's 92, and he restored it for the recording we did for Old Diggers Picnic in this room with that piano, and it's the most beautiful piano sound on the recording. I couldn't be happier to have been in this room. And Jack used to restore pianos, and he calls me Margaret. He's very funny, and he's got really thick glasses, and he wears a hat, and he catches the train from Carnegie and goes fishing and tells dirty jokes and restores pianos. He's that sort of gorgeous man.
Yeah.
And he said, Margaret, I want some velvet soap and I want some steel wool, and have you got an old shirt you can rip up as a rag? He said, I've got a few in my pocket, and he pulled them out. Anyway, he stood over that piano. The strings were a little bit corroded from dust and moisture over 30 years. Sure. And he said, now the velvet soap will protect them, the strings, because it's got fat in it, and it'll take the corrosion off without damaging the strings. And he said, did you know there are 9 tons of pressure on every string in that piano?
9 tons.
And then he said, I'll come back next week. He spent 2 hours scrubbing the strings. Next week he came, and I came into this room, and the keys were on the floor, the whole keyboard. Everything was out, was pulled apart. And then he fluffed up all the felts, because there's an indentation where the hammers hit the strings, and they get dull.
Yeah.
or they're too bouncy, I forget which way. So he had this special little thing and he just rubbed every little felt till it was just right. And it was beautiful, beautiful. So it's been restored and he said that'll last another 30 years now without needing any sort of restructuring. But the people who make pianos say that no piano over 80 years old is any good as an instrument. They just can't be tuned and hold it for some reason. It must be to do with the wear and tear of the soundboard.
Maybe people just don't know how to restore them after that age.
No, maybe not. But it is to do with the timber that's used too, you know. It makes a huge difference. Like I think that's spruce, Japanese spruce, and that's a beautiful timber. It can expand and contract without causing too much trouble. It does it very gently.
Sure.
So there's all of that, like Stradivarius violins. It's the timber and everything in those that makes that tone over time that, you know. I don't know how they restore, but I know pianos that there's a lot of pressure, as he said, on the strings. So
I didn't know it was 9 tons. It's a lot.
Amazing. So if you let the strings, if it goes out of tune and flat and stretches too much, you can never pull it back and have it stay because it's too much. You've got to do it all the time, tweaking and keep.
How often do you get it tuned?
Bad. Well, because Jack said I'm not tuning it, I don't trust myself anymore. I did get another tuner just prior to. You should do it every year.
Once a year or something like that.
But when it's humid, as it has been, every piano I play in Melbourne is out of tune now because of all that rain and stuff.
Sure.
They're very, very susceptible to temperature and moisture.
It's just the wood, though, as you were saying. It's the wood.
Yep, all of that. So I have been a bit negligent, but it's come back beautifully and held its tune. And so I'm very lucky, and I could kiss it and love it. It's just beautiful. Mm.
Well, I think you should just keep talking to it and allowing it just to talk back to you and just keep busting out that beautiful music you keep doing. That'd be great.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Beautiful. I love the bass end of the piano. Like I love deeper singing. I always love the bass end of everything, which is weird. And bass players are nice to me because
of that.
Yeah, because of that. But also they could be very cross with me because I'm in their space. You know, contemporary jazz players don't play where I do at that end. They play more comping style, which I love, but I can't do. I'm too locked into that left-hand attitude on the piano. I think
your rhythm
I'm never going to change that. But bass players are meant to do that in some more contemporary situations too. But Howard Cairns is so good-natured that he simply duplicates my lines to a large extent, and then he'll do his own, and I follow him. So it's
go for a little walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's lovely. It's lovely. I love it. I've got like double bass feel behind me and mine as well. It's really strong, you know. I don't know why I love the deeper end. It's resonant.
I think that's maybe this is the vibrations, the frequency, because it's something you can feel, you know.
You can.
You can feel. You feel the tone. Maybe that's what it is. It's not as an audible response that you're getting as well, but it's also a physical one that you're getting.
It is a vibration. So it's just fantastic. So it's sort of like, you know, if you put your head on someone's chest and they talk, you get those soothing vibrations.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's part of it.
Sure.
I'm sure it's part of it. And I'm sure it affects me physically in a therapeutic sort of way. I'm absolutely positive because my mood can change dramatically if I get into a song and I'm just alone with the piano. I can be really changed by actually physically playing. So I wish everyone in the world could learn an instrument and play every day.
I don't know why people don't.
They need to.
I think about this. This is something I think about. I don't understand why more people. And you hear people say, "Oh, I can't. I don't have a musical bone in my body." I'm like,
rubbish.
I don't know. It's like standing. I look at them like, and music. Not that I don't think it comes naturally to me. I didn't have to work as hard as some people did, but I still had to work hard at it.
You do.
But you work hard at language. You work hard when you're a kid writing. You work hard at mathematics and sums and the job or the career that you go off to do. And for me, music, I often hear people, God, I wish I could play the piano or the guitar or the harp, or I wish I could play the trumpet, or I wish I could just play an instrument. You're just like, you can. I don't know why you don't, or why more people don't play music.
They need to do it as children, I think, because you do have more time, even if you're sort of given a strict routine where you have to practice, because it is a practice skill.
It's muscle.
And it's muscle, it's repetitive. But you get so much back from that once it's a bit like if you're a good basketball player, you've probably spent hours practicing getting it accurate, just throwing and throwing until your learning is subconscious. So it moves from a very self-conscious learning to a subconscious learning, and that's what you get from repetition. And then you can call on that when you want to express a feeling, because you've got something there to use. It's a tool, but I think anyone, if they've got the time, should be learning an instrument or singing or, any instrument. The only other instrument I'd love to have learned is the cello, because, again, it's string and, again, it's got a depth. And I think it just cries, that instrument. It's got extraordinary emotional qualities.
It's a tone. I think the tone in the cello is incredible.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
It's a bit heartbreaking, isn't it?
It is heartbreaking, but it's a really good way to expunge your own demons again.
Sure.
That's what we're all doing with the instrumentation. That's what you're doing when you're acting. That's what you're doing when you're writing. It's a way of transferring your own stuff into another context where you're actually looking at it and dealing with it, and it's really good for you. In fact, I've always had this other crazy idea that everyone in the world would sing a note at the same time and it was recorded, and have this huge global choir and all different notes, and they'll all be dissonant and some will be harmonious, and it'll be like order and chaos.
I'm not much of a classical orchestra kind of choir music. It's just not that, and techno. I'm just like that doesn't really do much for me. But there's an American. He's quite young. I think he's in his 40s. American composer who had this crazy idea, quite similar. Where he did a YouTube, I can't remember his name. He did a YouTube choir, and he recorded and put out an album.
Oh yeah, I think I heard about that.
Yeah, and he got like thousands of people. And I think the first one that he did was like, I think he chose 500 or 100 or 500. I can't quite remember. Musicians, choir singers that he auditioned around the world on YouTube, and then they sent in their audition through. I think they had maybe home studios or setups or something like that, and they all did a global collaboration of that song and different melodies and different parts, and because they're all tenors and sopranos, and and I think that's amazing, and again I think that goes back to that global language and of music, of everyone speaking that music allows people to understand what someone else is saying.
It would be a lovely thing to do, wouldn't it? Because you could just do it with mobile phones.
You could. The microphones and mobile phones.
They'd be fine.
Amazing.
They'd be fine. Just imagine having that collaboration. I mean, it's difficult with time changes. You'd have to find a
suitable.
Somewhere in the middle.
Civilised
for the world.
Yeah.
But I don't think people would care if it was 3 a.m. and it was 9 somewhere else and everyone sang at once. It would be just lovely. But anyway, some techno person might do that. You know how they have everyone turns the lights off once a year?
I do.
That sort of thing, except you turn on your voice.
That's a good idea.
Goes to some goodness. I don't know what the technology is for that it has to go to. It could go to the cloud or something, couldn't it?
That is so far beyond my technical.
Yeah, me too. But it could. I like the idea of it going to the cloud and coming back to Earth. just this one universal song from everyone on the earth. I mean, you won't get some people wanting to do it, but...
I think the closest thing I came to that recently was reading a book. I finally started reading Bryce Courtney's books. It's taken me years because my mother reads Bryce Courtney and Catherine Cook's, and I'm like, oh God, that bloody bores me. And so I finally started reading, and I read one of his books about 18 months ago and loved it, unfortunately. So then started reading the other ones. Then I just finished reading The Power of One, and then the second book of that as well, Tandir. And there's a song they do, like this German professor that lives with a young boy. He's an orchestral genius, and so he writes the song called "The Song of Africa" and gets all the prisoners and all the blacks and that to sing this incredible song. And they talk about this massive harmonious thing in this prison cell. It's incredible, and all at once, without anyone sort of knowing that they're all singing. They just sort of all start, and they all just sort of know when to start in the different tribes, and it's collaborative, but also instinctual as well. There's like this, especially with that, there's like with other musicians or cultures that have music in their culture that's ingrained in there, like the Irish, a lot of the Africans, and the Jewish have a lot of music in their culture as well, and there's almost like an instinct that sort of takes over, and it's like there's no more beat sheet. It's just like people sort of feel when and what sort of comes next. I don't know. It's something that I read, and I was like,
I love all that. And I'm sure we learnt to sing by the birds. I'm sure and also I saw some soundscape artists work, and it was the reeds growing somewhere in Canada or somewhere, and when the wind blew a certain way, it created all these tones and harmonies, just the sound of the wind through the reeds growing in this lake, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I thought, we can't take credit for much that we're very good at creating things and using them, but I'm sure the birds and the wind and the reeds and the stuff taught us how to hear sound and music. I have no doubt about that, There's an English song thrush. I know they're not here much anymore because they're introduced, and I don't think, there are many of them around. But I heard one in Hobart 2 months ago, but I do remember one here near the house, and they sing a major seventh.
Right on.
Right on. And it's usually in the still of a coldish sort of night.
So it carries.
And it carries. And it's a major seventh. And I know the Magpies sing B flat, A flat, B flat, F, because I went out and documented the notes for one of the songs we did, the Magpie Stomp, and then another one I wrote on this album, which has got a coda. It's a magpie call, and I checked it because I'd run in and check because I can keep a note in my head if I hear the birds.
Sure.
And it was always B flat, no matter what magpie. And it's sort of a part distress call, but it's a really groovy. It sounds like, I don't know, contemporary jazz saxophonist sort of phrase. It's really good, and I've integrated it into the coda of Old Digger's Picnic, and it's definitely B flat, A flat, B flat, and it's the same B flat every time.
That's amazing.
Above middle C. So I'm amazed at that. And they all do it, and they all sing in the same key, and they all use the same notes.
There's nothing, I always think, there's one thing I miss about New Zealand is there's just so many birds in New Zealand, and you're just constantly surrounded by song. Yeah. And there is a lot of birds in Australia, but it's nothing like New Zealand. You go to New Zealand, you'll go camping or you'll go to the country, and all you hear is birds, bellbirds, magpies. We get beautiful magpies, a little bit smaller than the ones here.
You've got bellbirds too.
Yeah. We get amazing tuis that sound incredible. All our birds are, gorgeous, except for the kiwis. It's kind of a useless little bird, the kiwi. I don't know what it does. It's pathetic. It's our emblem. It's like, I don't know what it's.
It looks like
it's
a
blind.
very nice little bird.
It is. It's cute, and that's its problem. And no wonder it's nearly bloody extinct. It's It's pretty quick for its size. A little fat little thing with can't really see, can't fly. It's like a lazy chicken.
Poor, that's tragedy. You mean to say they're nearly extinct?
Well, they are in some parts. Yeah, there's some certain types of little kiwis that were made extinct because the stoats and the weasels and dogs and cats being introduced in New Zealand. They had no predator apart from a giant eagle.
Right.
And the Māori and the Moriori, going back hundreds of years, but that's kind of it. And it's this stupid nocturnal, blind, long-beaked, stupid, fat, I'm sure incredibly good tasting kiwi that was like running around eating hoo-hoo grubs everywhere.
They look so lovely.
They're pretty cute, but and that's their problem. And I think that's a bit of a shame.
Anyway, the birds have taught us how to sing.
I agree.
And so has the wind. So you see, we're lucky.
Well, I think we're all pretty lucky, and I think we're lucky to have. It's been amazing talking to you, and I feel very fortunate that I've had the opportunity, and you've said sure to sit down and chat about a little bit of your life and your influences. And
it's been fun, Kieran.
I feel
really
very fortunate. So
don't feel fortunate. It's just lovely to talk, just chat, and remember some things myself that I might have forgotten.
And you will keep learning. You will keep growing. You've got a healthy unfair of getting things wrong, I think.
I might. There's only one thing. I'm going to write another song to help me overcome the terror of failing in performance or making a mistake, which is called Let's Make Mistakes. So it's going to be the complete opposite of my whole life. When I was terrified of exams, terrified of performance, always am, always has been. This will be my way of actually trying to make a mistake, and the song allows me to do it. So that's going to be my next song, Let's Make Mistakes, before I do the planets.
I think that's a good idea. And so where can people find your music?
Oh, goodness. I think I have a music page, but I never look at it. I don't. And I don't really use Facebook, but I guess I'm there somewhere.
And you're at Claypots.
And I'm at Claypots in Kilda. Look, that's the deal. You know, it's Barclay Street. It's a lovely restaurant, but you don't have to eat there. You can just have a drink in the bar, and it costs nothing. And it's Sunday nights at 8:30 every Sunday.
It's a good vibe.
And people dance and smash up the trumpet's mouth by falling over and all sorts of stuff. And
it's a proper live gig.
It's a proper live gig, and we don't have a wire cage, so it's all good.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sitting there and talking
Kieran.
to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. So, as I promised, cool chat, cool woman. Thanks very much for being there, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.